"Near you I lose myself," the cowboy whispered, and she followed him into the dark. The small town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, yet secrets still found their way into dusty corners and quiet streets. The town itself was surrounded by open fields, stretching far into the horizon, and by long, lonely roads that glimmered under the setting sun. The wind often carried the smell of dry grass and earth, and the sky would stretch so wide that it felt like it could hold all the dreams and worries of the people living there. It was the kind of town where life moved slowly, and yet every small event seemed bigger than it actually was. Daniel Hayes returned to Willow Creek after many years away. People in the town noticed him immediately when he stepped into the local grocery store one afternoon. His clothes were simple, worn from hard work, his boots dusty from the roads he had walked, but it wasn't his appearance that drew attention. It was the way he carried himself. There was a quietness about him, a calm that made people curious, a stillness that suggested he had lived through things most of them could only guess at. Children stared at him from the sidewalks, wondering what stories he might carry, while the adults whispered to each other about the years he had been gone. Daniel hadn't come back for attention. He hadn't come back to prove anything to anyone. He had returned because he needed to be somewhere familiar, somewhere that felt like home, even if it didn't heal all the invisible wounds he carried. The ranch his family owned was quiet, just as he remembered it, with a small wooden house at the center, surrounded by fields that rolled endlessly in every direction. The cattle grazed slowly in the evening light, and the horses moved with the gentle rhythm of old routines. He had missed this place more than he realized when he was away, and even though it had changed in some ways, it still felt like it belonged to him. Emma Collins was new to Willow Creek. She had moved from the city, seeking a slower life and a chance to focus on her work as a schoolteacher. Her apartment was small but cozy, and she enjoyed waking up to the sound of birds and the quiet streets, though at first the town had seemed almost too quiet, almost too still. She spent her mornings preparing lessons and her afternoons exploring the town, slowly learning the faces and names of the people who lived there. Willow Creek was a place where introductions lasted for hours, where neighbors brought over baked goods and shared stories about their families. Emma found comfort in the small routines, though she carried a gentle sadness with her, a longing for connection that she hadn't fully understood until she arrived in this town. Their first meeting was almost accidental. Emma's car had broken down on the dusty road just outside the town. The engine refused to start, and she realized that she was miles from anyone who could help. She sat on the edge of the road trying to call a tow truck when a figure appeared over the hill. It was Daniel. He had been riding back from the ranch, guiding a horse through the tall grass, when he noticed her car. Without hesitation, he approached. There was no hesitation in his movements, no awkwardness, just calm and quiet confidence. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice low and steady, carrying a softness that didn't quite match the rugged lines of his face. Emma looked up, startled but relieved. "Yes, please. My car just died, I think." Daniel nodded, his eyes scanning the engine briefly. "It's the battery. Loose connection. I can fix it." Within minutes, he had opened the hood, tightened the wires, and started the engine again. The car hummed back to life, and Emma couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and curiosity. "Thank you," she said, smiling for the first time that day. Daniel nodded again, not offering a smile, but there was a hint of something in his eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of shared relief. "Roads get darker out here faster than people expect," he said simply. Emma wasn't sure what he meant, but there was a weight in the words, a sense that they meant more than just the approaching night. She nodded, not knowing what else to say, and thanked him once more before driving slowly back into town. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something about him had changed her day in a way she hadn't anticipated. Over the next few weeks, Emma began seeing Daniel more often. Sometimes it was at the grocery store, sometimes at the feed store, and occasionally when she drove past the ranch. Each time, he appeared as though he belonged to the land itself, moving naturally, quietly, and almost as if he had always been part of the town's background. He never approached her first after that day, but somehow they always ended up talking, whether briefly or for longer stretches of time. One evening she found herself at the small-town park, sitting on a worn bench under a large oak tree. Daniel appeared from the path behind her, carrying a small bag with a few tools. He stopped, noticing her, but not startled by her presence. "Evening," he said quietly. "Evening," she replied. He sat down a few feet away, and for a long moment neither spoke. They watched the sun begin to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The wind rustled the leaves gently, and the distant sound of a dog barking echoed softly. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "Near you, I lose myself." Emma turned to look at him, surprised. His eyes were serious, honest, and somehow filled with something she couldn't name. "What do you mean?" she asked softly, unsure whether she wanted an answer, or whether it was better to leave the words hanging in the air. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked at the horizon, then back at her. "I mean that, when I'm near you, I forget a little of the weight I carry. It's easier to breathe, easier to be still. You make the world quieter for me." Emma's heart felt tight in her chest. She wasn't sure why his words affected her so deeply, but she understood the feeling intuitively. The feeling of being seen, of being understood without explanation. She smiled, a small, hesitant smile. "I'm glad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. From that day on, their connection grew slowly, naturally. They spent afternoons together at the ranch, where Daniel showed her how to ride horses, how to tend to the cattle, and even how to read the skies to predict storms. She watched him work, his movements careful and practiced, his attention focused and deliberate. There was an ease in him that she had never experienced with anyone before. Evenings were spent sitting by the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they sat in silence. Each moment felt significant, as though the world itself had narrowed around them to just the two of them, the ranch and the endless night sky. Yet, despite their closeness, Daniel never revealed much about the years he had spent away. He carried a quiet sadness, a weight that lingered in his eyes and in his posture. Emma sensed it, felt it, and though she wanted to ask, she also felt that some things had to be shared in their own time. She respected the boundaries he silently set, hoping that one day he would trust her enough to open up. Their bond was quiet but powerful. Emma began to notice small changes in herself. She laughed more freely, walked with a lighter step, and found herself thinking of Daniel even when she wasn't at the ranch. She began to realize that his presence had become a kind of anchor in her life, steady and comforting in a way she hadn't expected. One afternoon, while they were repairing a fence together, Daniel paused and looked at her carefully. "You've been spending a lot of time here," he observed, almost as a statement rather than a question. Emma shrugged lightly. "I like it here. It's peaceful. And I like being around you." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he went back to hammering the fence post, though his hands moved a little slower than before, as if he were considering her words carefully. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I'm glad you're here. But remember, some parts of this place, some parts of me, are hard to reach. I want to try anyway." And in that moment, Daniel allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to cross his face. It was the first time she had seen him smile fully, and it stayed with her long after the sun had dipped below the horizon. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern continued. Their connection deepened, built not on dramatic declarations or sudden events, but on quiet understanding, shared silences, and small acts of care. Daniel's presence was grounding, steadying, and Emma found herself drawn into his world more and more, feeling at home in ways she hadn't expected. By the time the first month had passed since their carside meeting, they both understood that something significant was growing between them. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, and it wasn't yet fully named, but it existed, quietly, in the space between them, in the soft conversations, the shared sunsets, and the long moments of silence where no words were needed. Daniel had returned to Willow Creek, seeking familiarity, perhaps even solitude. But what he found was something unexpected, a companion who brought light to the quiet spaces he carried within himself. Emma had come to a new town seeking simplicity and purpose, and what she found was something just as unexpected, a connection that made her feel seen, understood, and alive. And as they sat together one evening, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky, neither of them realized just how much their lives were about to change, or how deeply intertwined their paths would become. That quiet moment, shared without expectation, was the first step into a story that neither of them could yet fully imagine, but both would come to cherish, in ways that would last long after the sun rose over the endless fields of Willow Creek. After weeks of small conversations, shared sunsets, and quiet rides through the ranch, Emma and Daniel found themselves more comfortable around each other than either had expected. Days that had once felt ordinary suddenly seemed brighter and fuller. Emma looked forward to mornings when she could leave her apartment and walk the few miles to the ranch. She carried a small backpack with snacks, notebooks, and sometimes a camera to capture the light over the fields. Every visit felt like stepping into a space where she could breathe fully, away from the noise of the town and the loneliness that had quietly followed her since she moved. Daniel noticed her presence in ways he hadn't admitted, even to himself. He liked the way she moved among the animals, her careful, gentle hands brushing over the horses' manes, the way she laughed softly when a calf stumbled or a chicken ran too fast. It reminded him of a life he had once known, a life that had been steady, safe, and simple, before he had made choices that led him away from everything familiar. He didn't speak much about those years, not even to himself. There were memories he had locked away, memories that brought both shame and pain, and he wasn't sure he could share them without crumbling the careful mask of calm he carried. Emma, in turn, noticed the small silences in Daniel. Sometimes, when she asked him a question about his past or about the town, he would look away, his eyes distant, and answer vaguely. "I've been away for a long time," he would say. "Some things I'm not ready to talk about yet." Emma respected that, though her curiosity often bubbled under the surface. There was something in him that begged to be understood, something that called to her empathy. She didn't push. Instead, she focused on being present, on listening when he spoke, and sharing small stories about her own life. It was a delicate balance, one she navigated with care, knowing that trust could not be forced. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Emma found herself sitting on the porch steps of the ranch house. The wind carried the soft scent of dry grass and hay. Daniel approached slowly, holding 2 mugs of warm tea. He handed one to her, and they sat together in silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I like these moments," Emma said softly. "Just sitting here without anyone asking for anything. There's peace in them," he replied, his voice low. Sometimes I forget everything else when it's this quiet. Emma sipped her tea, feeling the warmth spread through her hands. I feel the same way. It's like time slows down here. Daniel's gaze lingered on her. Near you, I lose myself, he said again, almost like a confession this time. Emma looked at him, her heart tightening. She had heard those words before, but now, in the gentle darkness, they felt heavier, filled with meaning she couldn't yet fully understand. I think I understand, she said. You feel safe? Daniel shook his head slowly. It's more than that. I feel lighter, less afraid of the things I can't control. Emma reached out and touched his hand briefly. I'm glad I can help, she said, though part of her felt she was helping herself too. Being near him, she felt alive, connected, like the loneliness she had carried for so long was finally being replaced with something real. As the weeks passed, their bond grew deeper. Emma began spending longer periods at the ranch, sometimes staying into the evening just to watch the sunset with Daniel. They shared quiet meals, tending to chores together, and even started planting a small vegetable garden near the house. Each activity was simple, ordinary, yet it carried a new sense of purpose and joy. But with closeness came small tensions. Daniel's past remained a shadow over their growing friendship. He would sometimes disappear for hours, riding out into the fields without explanation. When Emma asked where he had gone, he would shrug and say, "Just clearing my head." She wanted to trust him, and she tried, but worry and curiosity gnawed at her. One rainy afternoon, Emma stayed at the ranch during a storm. The power went out, leaving the house illuminated only by the soft glow of lanterns. Rain tapped against the roof and windows, creating a steady rhythm. Emma noticed Daniel sitting quietly by the fire, staring into the flames, lost in thought. "Daniel," she asked gently, "do you ever think about the past?" He didn't answer at first. The firelight flickered across his face, showing lines of weariness that only added to his quiet strength. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured. "I left this town a long time ago," he said. "I thought I needed more excitement, more money, more freedom. I made mistakes, trusted the wrong people, lost friends, lost chances, and I lost myself." Emma listened, her hands wrapped around her mug. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That sounds really hard." He shook his head. "It is what it is. I can't change the past. I came back because I needed to face it. And because, well, maybe I needed to find a place where I could start over." Emma nodded slowly, understanding more than he realized. She had known her own struggles, her own moments of feeling lost in life, and she could empathize with the way he carried his regrets quietly, without complaint, but with weight. "You don't have to talk about it all," she said. "You just have to be honest when you can." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment the distance he always kept seemed to fade. "You're patient," he said quietly. "I appreciate that." Their conversations began to change after that evening. While Daniel still kept most of his past locked away, he started sharing small stories, moments from the years he had spent away. Some were light and humorous, times when he had gotten lost in strange towns or tried odd jobs he was terrible at. Others carried more weight, moments of regret, loneliness, and choices he wished he could undo. Emma listened without judgment, offering comfort without pressure. Despite the growing intimacy, Emma began to notice subtle changes in herself. She skipped social events she had once enjoyed, Calls with old friends became less frequent. She found herself spending more and more time at the ranch, not out of obligation, but because the pull of Daniel and the life there felt stronger than anything else. It was a new rhythm she had fallen into, one that she didn't question until late one night when she realized she hadn't seen a friend in weeks. Still, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. The ranch had become a place where she felt needed, valued, and understood. And Daniel, in his quiet, unassuming way, had become someone she couldn't imagine being without. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, Daniel suggested they take a ride through the northern fields. Emma climbed onto her horse, feeling the wind on her face as they moved through the tall grass. The fields stretched endlessly around them, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. It was moments like this, she realized, that made her feel alive, moments where the world outside the ranch didn't exist, and it was just the two of them, riding side by side in silence. Daniel spoke rarely during these rides, letting the sounds of the horses' hooves and the wind fill the spaces between them. Yet each word he chose carried weight. "The fields are quiet tonight," he said softly, almost like they're holding their breath. Emma smiled, understanding more than the words themselves. "It feels peaceful," she said. "Yes," Daniel replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Peaceful and honest. The world out there, in town, it's not always honest. But here, it is." Emma felt a shiver of understanding. The ranch was more than just land and animals. It was a place where Daniel could be himself, where he could shed the masks he wore in the outside world. And somehow, being near him, she felt that honesty too. Despite the calm, there were still moments when Daniel seemed haunted, moments when he would glance at the horizon with a faraway look, or pause in the middle of a sentence, as though something invisible weighed heavily on his mind. Emma noticed, but she didn't press. She knew some shadows had to be faced in their own time. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Daniel finally spoke about something that had clearly weighed on him. "People from my past, they've tried to contact me again," he admitted, his voice quiet but tense. "Old business, old mistakes. I'm afraid they'll come here, and I don't want anyone dragged into what I've done." Emma looked at him, her heart tightening. "You don't have to face it alone," she said softly. "I'm not afraid of you or your past. I'll stand by you." He shook his head, a mixture of gratitude and worry in his expression. "I can't ask that of you. You have your own life, your own path. I can't let my mistakes take that from you." Emma smiled gently, reaching for his hand. "I'm already here. I've already chosen to be. That's all that matters." Under the blanket of stars, their bond grew stronger, not just from shared smiles and soft laughter, but from the understanding that trust and care sometimes meant stepping into each other's darkness, even when it was uncertain and frightening. Days passed after Daniel's quiet confession about people from his past. The air between him and Emma felt heavier, filled with unspoken words and the kind of tension that only grows when two people care deeply but are unsure how to face their fears together. Emma spent most mornings at the ranch, helping with the chores or tending to the animals, but her thoughts often wandered to Daniel. She wondered about the past he kept hidden, the mistakes that haunted him, and the reasons he sometimes disappeared into the fields for hours without explanation. Daniel noticed the change in her too. She was quieter, more pensive, as if carrying the weight of his troubles along with her own. He didn't want her to feel trapped or responsible for him, yet he found himself relying on her presence more than he expected. Near her, he could relax in a way he hadn't been able to for years. He could forget the mistakes, the regrets, and the heavy shadows of his past, and yet he also knew that his world was complicated, messy, and not entirely safe for someone like Emma to enter. One late afternoon, a tense wind swept across the ranch, signaling an approaching storm. Daniel had gone out to check the fences, leaving Emma inside the house, her hands folded over her notebook as she tried to focus on her lesson plans. She had been restless all day, glancing out the windows every few minutes, wondering why he hadn't returned yet. The sky darkened faster than usual, clouds rolling in and blotting out the sunlight. Suddenly, the sound of a horse's hooves reached her ears. She rushed outside to see Daniel riding back, his face pale, eyes wide with unease. He slowed the horse as he approached, gripping the reins tightly. Emma noticed the tension in his body, the way his shoulders stiffened even as he dismounted. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, her voice sharp with concern. He shook his head, struggling to find the words. "It's complicated," he said finally. "I need to go out again. I can't explain everything yet. But I can't go alone." Emma felt a rush of fear mixed with determination. She didn't know exactly what he meant, but she understood instinctively that this was serious. Without thinking twice, she grabbed her coat and followed him to the stables. The storm had started to pick up. Rain splashed against her face as she climbed onto a second horse, keeping pace with Daniel as he guided them down a narrow path into the darker part of the fields. The tall grass whipped against their legs and the wind howled around them, carrying the smell of wet earth and distant lightning. Daniel didn't speak much, focusing on the path ahead. Daniel didn't speak much, but Emma sensed the urgency in his movements, the way he constantly scanned the horizon as if expecting danger. The darkness grew thicker as they moved further from the ranch, the familiar landscapes turning into shadows and shapes that felt almost unfamiliar in the storm. Finally, he stopped near a grove of trees on the edge of the property. The lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating a small group of figures waiting by a worn truck. Daniel's grip tightened on the reins, and his jaw set firmly. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She could sense the tension radiating off him, the same tension he carried inside for years. "They're from my past," he whispered, his voice low but steady. "People I trusted once, who caused a lot of harm. I need to handle this, but I can't do it alone." Emma's hands trembled slightly, but she nodded. "I'm here. Whatever happens, we face it together." Daniel looked at her for the first time since they had arrived. There was gratitude, fear, and a hint of vulnerability in his eyes that she had never seen before. He didn't speak, only gave a slight nod, and together they approached the group. The confrontation was tense but silent. Daniel spoke calmly, with authority, explaining that their business or personal matters from the past were closed now. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, but the firmness in his tone left no room for argument. Emma watched silently, her heart racing, noticing for the first time the strength and courage Daniel had cultivated over the years of hardship. Once the group left, Daniel sank to the ground under a tree, the rain dripping from his hat and coat. Emma dismounted and sat beside him, her hands gripping his arm. "You handled that well," she said softly. I didn't know you could be like that." He gave a small, weary smile. "It's not about being strong. It's about surviving, and about keeping people safe, especially those I care about." His eyes met hers, and for a long moment there was silence, heavy but comforting. Emma realized then that following him into this darkness, into the storm, into his past, was more than just loyalty or love. It was a choice to stand beside someone not just in the light and laughter, but in the shadows and fears that they rarely showed to the world. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, slower. The storm had begun to ease, leaving behind a damp, earthy smell and a sky half lit by the retreating clouds. Emma stayed close to Daniel, not speaking, only offering silent support. He seemed different now, a mixture of relief and exhaustion, and she understood that this was what it meant to truly know someone, their pain, their struggles, and the parts they tried to hide. Over the next few days, the impact of the storm and the confrontation lingered. Daniel spent more time in reflection, often staring out at the fields, lost in thought. Emma stayed near him, sometimes sitting quietly, sometimes helping with chores, allowing her presence to be a quiet anchor. They didn't talk much about the past confrontation, but both knew that it had shifted something between them. There was trust, yes, but also a recognition of the fragility of their situation. Despite the tension, there were moments of beauty and calm. They continued to ride through the fields, tend to the animals, and watch the sunsets. Daniel showed Emma the hidden corners of the ranch, the small creek where deer often came to drink, the hilltop where the view of the sunset stretched endlessly, the little grove of trees where he sometimes went to think. Each place carried a story, a memory, or a piece of himself he had decided to share. Emma began to understand more about Daniel's nature, the way he held his emotions close, the way he balanced strength and vulnerability, and the way he depended on the land and routine to heal. She also realized that following him into the dark didn't mean losing herself. It meant learning to see someone else's struggles, respecting them, and offering support without judgment. One evening, after a long day, they sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets, sipping warm tea. The sky was clear now, full of stars that seemed brighter after the storm. Daniel spoke softly, almost to himself. "I never thought I'd be able to face that part of my past without fear," he admitted. "But having you there, it made it possible." Emma reached out and held his hand, feeling the rough calluses from years of work. "You don't have to face anything alone," she said gently. "I'll stay with you, but only if you let me. I can't fix your past, Daniel, but I can be here with you." He looked at her, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of love, trust, and courage. He had always protected himself from the world, from disappointment, from pain. But with Emma, he allowed a crack in his armor, a small glimpse of the man he could be if he let someone in. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees and the stars shone above, Emma realized that following Daniel into his darkness had changed her. She felt stronger, more confident, and more connected to someone in a way she had never experienced. It was terrifying, yes, but also exhilarating. She had stepped into the unknown, and it had made her feel alive. Daniel, for his part, felt a shift as well. He realized that sharing his struggles didn't make him weak, it made him human. He could lean on someone else, trust them, and still retain his own strength. Emma's presence reminded him that love didn't have to be about perfection or hiding mistakes. It could be about understanding, patience, and shared courage. In the days that followed, their bond deepened further. They spoke more openly, laughed more freely, and shared quiet moments that felt like they belonged only to them. Yet the awareness of the past and the darkness that still lingered created a tension, a careful balance that they had to navigate. It was a delicate dance, but one they were both willing to try, because each moment together proved that the reward, trust, love, connection, was worth the risk. Emma's life in Willow Creek had changed. She no longer felt like an outsider. The ranch, the fields, and the quiet companionship of Daniel had become a place where she could grow, where she could face challenges, and where she could understand love in a way that was deep, honest, and unafraid of the shadows. Daniel, too, had changed. He was still the quiet cowboy of Willow Creek, the man who lived between dust and silence. But now, he was also someone who had allowed himself to be seen, to be trusted, and to love. The storm, the confrontation, and the moments of darkness had taught him that he didn't have to face life alone, and that sometimes sharing the weight made it lighter. And as the days turned into weeks, and the nights stretched across the endless fields, they both understood a truth they hadn't fully realized before, that sometimes following someone into the dark wasn't about fear. It was about trust, courage, and discovering the strength that comes from facing life together. The days after the storm and the confrontation with Daniel's past were calmer, yet a quiet tension lingered in the air. Daniel and Emma had grown closer than ever, but both felt the need to understand themselves before their bond could be fully free of fear and uncertainty. Emma noticed the subtle weight that Daniel carried, the way he sometimes stared at the horizon as if trying to see a path through all the regrets he had collected over the years. She wanted to be there for him, but deep inside, she also realized that to love someone fully, she could not lose herself along the way. Emma returned to her apartment in town that morning, walking through the quiet streets with a sense of reflection she hadn't experienced before. She thought about the last few weeks, the quiet rides through fields, the storms, the moments when Daniel had opened up, even if only slightly. She had followed him into his darkness, facing the unknown with him, yet now she understood something important. Love was not only about standing beside someone in their struggles. It was also about honoring her own heart, her own life, and her own needs. She decided to take a walk through the small park near her apartment, letting the soft morning sun warm her face. Children played on swings, the sound of laughter filling the air, and neighbors waved hello. The ordinary, simple life of Willow Creek felt welcoming in a way it hadn't before. Emma realized she had been so focused on Daniel, so absorbed in his world, that she had almost forgotten her own. But seeing the town alive with life reminded her that she belonged here, not only at the ranch but in the wider world she had come to love. That evening, she returned to the ranch. Daniel was already there, tending to the horses as the sun lowered itself behind the hills. He looked up as she approached, his expression a mixture of curiosity and quiet concern. "You've been quiet today," he observed gently, wiping his hands on a cloth. Emma took a deep breath. "I've been thinking," she said, "about us, about me, and about what it means to follow someone into their darkness." Daniel's eyes softened. "And what have you realized?" She paused, looking at the familiar fields that stretched endlessly around them. "I realized that following you was the right thing to do at the time. I wanted to be there, to support you, to face the past with you. But I also realized that I can't lose myself in the process. Love doesn't mean disappearing. It means growing together while still being yourself." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding her meaning. "I've feared that my past would take you away from me," he admitted. "I've tried to keep my struggles to myself, thinking I could protect you by being distant. But I see now that hiding only makes the darkness stronger." Emma smiled gently. "We can face things together, but only if we both stay true to ourselves. You don't have to carry it all alone anymore, and neither do I have to lose who I am." They spent the evening together in quiet conversation, sharing small stories and laughing softly. The night was calm, the stars shining bright above the ranch. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt a weight lifting from his chest. The past was still there, but it no longer held the same power over him. He had someone beside him who understood, someone who could face him honestly, and still choose to stay. Over the following weeks, life at the ranch began to settle into a new rhythm, one that included both the quiet work of tending to animals and the deeper work of healing old wounds. Daniel began confronting his past in practical ways, reaching out to those he had wronged, resolving old business matters honestly, and seeking forgiveness where it was due. He no longer ran from the shadows, he faced them with Emma's quiet support. Emma, in turn, embraced her own life with renewed purpose. She continued her work at the school, reconnecting with friends and colleagues, and found joy in the simple routines she had once taken for granted. She realized that her love for Daniel did not mean losing her own independence. It meant sharing a life that included both love and self-respect. One afternoon, while repairing a fence together, Daniel paused and looked at Emma. "I used to think that love was about sacrifice," he said, "that to love someone you had to give up everything else in your life. But I see now that real love is about balance. It's about being there for someone without losing yourself." Emma smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "Exactly. And I think that's what we've been learning. Sometimes the hardest lessons teach us the most important truths." They continued their work, their movements synchronized for months of shared chores and experiences. There was a comfort in the quiet cooperation, a sense that they could face any challenge together. Yet the most significant change was not in what they did, but in how they felt. They were no longer defined solely by past mistakes or fears. Instead, they were shaping a life together, one grounded in understanding, patience, and mutual respect. One evening, as the sun set in golden hues over the fields, Daniel suggested they ride to the hilltop to watch the last light disappear behind the horizon. Emma agreed, and they mounted their horses, the wind brushing against their faces as they rode. At the top of the hill, they dismounted and stood side by side, gazing at the endless fields bathed in twilight. Daniel turned to Emma, his expression earnest. "Near you," he said softly, echoing words he had spoken long ago, "I don't lose myself anymore. I feel whole. And I see that I can face the world, the past, and the future with you beside me." Emma reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "And I feel the same," she replied. "I don't lose myself near you. I grow. We grow together, not because we have to, but because we choose to." For a long moment, they simply stood there, holding hands, feeling the gentle rhythm of life around them. The world was quiet, the night stars shimmering above, and the soft rustle of the grass reminded them that even in the darkest moments, light could still be found. Life returned to a peaceful rhythm. Daniel no longer rode alone into the fields in worry or fear. Instead, he embraced each day with purpose and calm. Emma continued her teaching, nurturing young minds, and also nurturing the relationship that had become central to her life. Their love was no longer about danger or fear. It was about trust, support, and shared joy. Months later, the town held a small festival in the main square, celebrating the changing of the seasons. Emma and Daniel walked through the festival hand in hand, enjoying the simple pleasures of laughter, music, and community. Daniel introduced Emma to neighbors and old friends he had reconciled with, and she saw how deeply he had transformed. The boy who had once disappeared into the shadows had grown into a man who could face his past, embrace the present, and hope for the future. Emma felt a similar transformation. She was no longer the woman quietly observing life from the sidelines. She had stepped into challenges, followed someone she cared for into the unknown, and emerged stronger and more confident. Together they had faced darkness and emerged into light, not because life had been easy, but because they had chosen to be brave, honest, and present for each other. As the festival lights twinkled around them, Daniel whispered, "Thank you for following me, even when it was dark, and thank you for staying when you could have walked away." Emma smiled, resting her head gently against his shoulder. Thank you for letting me. Thank you for trusting me with the parts of you you've never shown anyone else." And in that moment, standing together in the middle of the festival, surrounded by light, music, and laughter, they understood fully what it meant to love and to be loved. They had followed each other through storms, past shadows, and into quiet fields, and now they could stand in the light together, whole and free. The night stretched on, full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long while, both Daniel and Emma felt completely at peace. They had faced their fears, acknowledged their pasts, and chosen each other, not as a lifeline, but as companions who could grow, laugh, and live fully together. Life in Willow Creek continued, calm and beautiful, with days full of work, joy, and the soft, steady rhythm of two hearts learning to beat as one. They were no longer defined by darkness or past regrets. They had found strength in trust, courage in love, and freedom in the knowledge that near each other they could be fully themselves. And as they walked back to the ranch under the twinkling stars, Daniel whispered softly, "Near you, I've found myself." Emma smiled, squeezing his hand. "And near you, I've found me." Together they entered the ranch house, leaving the past behind, embracing the present, and stepping forward into a future filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities.